held on the 29th of February 2024. I can see that we have present Councillors Buchanan, Dewar and Ferguson. Councillor Gowland? Yep, I can see that you are also present, as is Councillor Keat. Also present is Councillor Lockhart and Councillor Mars. Councillor McAdams? No, not seeing you present. Councillor Nugent is also in attendance. We have a number of officers present today, and with that, I'll pass you back to the Chair to commence today's business. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 1 on the agenda is any declaration of interest. Okay, we'll move on to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. So page 3 to 8. Can we agree the minutes?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mars. Then we'll move on to item 3, which is the capital budget monitoring 2023 to 24 and the grant fund capital programme pages 9 to 28. And Jackie Taylor and Derek Craig could present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our capital budget monitoring report, and this takes us to the 28th of December 2023. If I take you to section 4.2 of the report, we're reporting that we have a capital programme of £78.296 million, and that includes an adjustment to the programme which was approved by the Executive Committee on the 24th of January as part of a separate report on Green Hills Road, which is a City Region City Deal project. The details of that adjustment are included at Appendix A. At section 4.5, we're reporting our expected outturn, which is our expected spend for the year. And we are expecting that we will incur spend of around £72 million of our budget. We do have information on those projects where we expect to underspend this year and that funding will be carried forward. And that's detailed in Appendix E, along with anticipated completion dates for those projects. The majority of the underspend relates simply to timing of when we spend the money. At section 4.9, we look at the spend position to the 28th of December, and we can report that we've spent just over £34 million. That's slightly behind where we expect to be at this point in time, and it mainly reflects the timing of spend on projects. If I take you to the appendices, on page 12 in Appendix A, that gives the details of the adjustment I mentioned a second ago around Green Hills Road, which is for £6.6 million. In Appendix B, which is on page 13, this is when we start to get into a bit more detail of the spend and budget for each of the departments on capital, and you can see that there on page 13. On page 14, that information is broken down further, and you can see services and their budgets for capital with actual spend detailed in the right-hand column of that table. And then Appendix D, which is on page 15, shows the funding for the capital programme this year. As always, we report that the majority of our funding for capital comes from borrowing and also from Scottish Government grant, and you can see the details there in Appendix D. Appendix E I mentioned earlier, this is where we are seeing the projects that are still to complete into next financial year, and those completion dates are detailed for you on page 16. And then on page 17, we move on to the physical progress on our capital projects, and for that I'll hand over to Derek Craig.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Chair. Taking you through the build executive summary on page 17. And at the end of December, as period 10, we know is called as, is there are no projects on the general build executive summary behind programme. Over the page on the non-build executive summary, there are also no projects be reporting behind at that point in time either. Jumping forward to page 20 is the roads executive summary, and at that point in time there was one project which over on page 21, it refers to a SPT strategic cycle infrastructure. That's Carluke to Carstairs cycle route. And an explanation is given there that the project's behind due to extensive legal process, taking longer than we had envisaged with on the land ownership. And that's all to report on the operational side, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions to the report? Okay. So can we agree to, sorry, Councillor Lockhart.
Thanks, Chair. A question for Jackie, really. We've spent a little time, as you know, discussing extra borrowing for the roads, and the principle seems to be, whatever the rate was, spread over 40 years. Is this exactly the same for the borrowing that we've incurred for these projects? Is that how all borrowing is done, or is this done at different rates?
Thank you, Councillor Lockhart, for your question. Absolutely, the way that we borrow for capital expenditure is consistent. What can be different, though, is how we have to account for the write-offs of that debt. So depending on what we borrow for, it could be that that asset is expected to last for 40 years, and we will pay that debt over a 40-year period. And when I say pay off, I mean we will account in our books over a 40-year period for that debt. If we were to borrow for an asset that wouldn't last that long, for example, a vehicle or an IT system, then the period that we would account for the write-off would be shorter because that asset wouldn't be around for 40 or 50 years. So the principle is the same, but if we have different assets, it can be a different period that we would account for it over.
Great, thank you. And I've got another question, if that's all right, Chair. Having looked at some of this transport stuff recently, the cycling and all the rest of it, I got the feeling that there were very few journeys being made in rural areas compared to urban. And I see clearly there's a sum of money put aside for Carluke to Carstairs cycle route. How much is done to, if you like, investigate, ensure, or quantify really the money being spent on these cycle routes, especially the longer rural routes, and this is quite a long one, is really justified?
Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lockhart, I would have to revert to my colleagues in our roads department around what assessment is done on whether a project is value for money, or what assessment they make on how well these routes would be used. I do know that we get specific funding for active travel projects, and it could be that this is actually specific funding that we've been given for this particular route. But with your permission, I'll take your question back to our roads department and see if we can get a question answered and circulated around everybody.
Yes, thank you very much, Jackie. Okay, that's me.
Thank you, Councillor Lockhart. So if we agree the report?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mars. Moving on to item 3B is the capital budget monitoring from 2023 to 2024, the Housing Capital Programme, pages 29 to 34. I'm again passing back to Jackie and Derek for their input. Thank
you, Chair. So same time period that we're covering in this report is taking us to the 28th of December this year. This time we're on the Housing Capital Programme. At section 4.1, we're reporting that the programme for capital is just over £67.4 million. And at section 4.4, we're reporting that to the 28th of December, we have spent just under £41.3 million. So that's indicating that we're slightly ahead of programme at that point in time. If I take you to the appendix, in similar fashion to the General Fund programme, on Appendix A, which is on page 31, you can see the funding for the Housing Capital programme. The majority of funding for the Housing Capital programme comes from the Housing Revenue account and also from borrowing and Scottish Government grant for new builds. If we go on to Appendix B, this is where we talk about the physical progress on projects, and again, I'll ask Derek to talk to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jackie. Period 10 then, at the end of December, I'm pleased to say that there were no projects identified as being behind programme at that point in time, Chair. So that's all for the operational side of this report.
Thank you. Are there any questions on that report? Okay. Oh. Councillor Keats.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just probably a question for Jackie. I noticed this week when the Scottish Government set out their budget that the affordable housing budget, please accept my apologies, was going to be slashed. Is that going to have a direct impact on the grant we get from the Scottish Government in terms of housing? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keats, for your question. The answer is probably. But we don't know the details yet of how that will affect our programme. When the capital programme for next financial year, for 2024-25, was approved for housing capital, we did make reference to the fact that the funding that was available for affordable housing was being cut. But at this stage, we don't know what the impact for the council will be. It will be dependent on how the money that remains is allocated across projects across Scotland. So we will await to see how this will affect us, but I would suggest that it will affect our plans. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Keats, does that clarify your question? Is there anything else you would like to add?
Just a wee brief comment, probably a political comment, Chair, if you will. It is disappointing given that Shelter have come out and stated that we are in the midst of a housing crisis, and you probably every elected representative and officer in this room will be inundated with inquiries related to housing, homelessness, people really in dire straits. And I think given it is likely to have a knock-on impact on our capacity to provide for these individuals in our communities, it's disappointing news, and I hope that we as an authority can handle it as best as we can to support the most vulnerable. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Can we agree the report then?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mars. So moving on to item number 4, the Revenue Budget Monitoring 2023 to 24, pages 35 to 40. Jackie Taylor again, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Chair. So again, we're talking about the period to the 20th of December here, but now we're moving on to our revenue budget. At section 4, we remind the forum around our probable outturn position. So this is how we expect to finish the year in terms of spend. And this is as we've reported before and reported to the Executive Committee. We have been reporting that we expect an underspend of £9 million, and that's after proposed transfers to reserves that we've shared previously. It's been agreed that £9 million would be set aside in reserves, with £3 million being set aside to support budget pressures in 2024-25, and the remaining £6 million to be considered to support the Council's budget strategy. At section 4.3, which starts at the bottom of page 35, there's reference to teacher numbers and the holdback of money that took place in 2023-24 in relation to teacher numbers and maintaining teacher numbers. Whilst we still haven't received the funding that we expect around that, we do know that we maintained our teacher numbers in 2023-24, so we are working on the basis that that holdback of funding will now be released. At section 5, we cover the position to the 20th of December, and we are reporting a net underspend of just over £1.5 million, and that's after we account for the transfers to reserves that I mentioned earlier. That is in line with our expectations for the year. The housing revenue account position is covered at section 6. We are reporting a break-even position on our budget, and we expect that to continue to the end of the year. There's a number of appendices to this report, starting on page 38. Now, these are very detailed appendices, but they show for each of the Council's departments what the spend has been to the 20th of December and the variance to budget at that point in time. You can see that on page 38. As we move into page 39, which is Appendix 2, you have similar information, but this time broken down over departments, but after we have transferred money to reserves. So similar information, but this time after we assume those transfers to reserves have previously been approved. Appendix 3, which is on page 40, shows the position for the housing revenue account, and as I say, that's to the end of December, the 20th of December. You can see on the bottom right-hand side of those figures on that table, we're reporting a break-even position. That's all I would report, Chair, but happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions on that report? Councillor Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the paragraph that outlines the implications of the money for the teacher numbers, is that money, Jackie, that is already allocated, or is that money that now will become available when we eventually receive it? And secondly, I'm aware that there's a new model for allocating the money for the maintenance of teacher numbers. Is that going to impact us as well, how we do things differently? Thank you.
Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Keats. So if I take your first question first, the amount that refers to this year, the £2.9 million that's in that paragraph, we have been working through the year assuming that we will get that money. So it's already built into our budgets. If we didn't get that money, it would have caused us a financial gap. We are getting the money, hopefully. There's no reason to believe that we won't. So we are ending up the year as we expect to be and we'd planned for. So there's no extra money coming for 23-24. In relation to the financial year that we're moving into, what we have been told is that there will be a similar arrangement where we are expected to maintain teacher numbers. An amount of money has been identified by the government that they will look to allocate to councils, but they're referring to that as a specific revenue grant. And what that means is it will have conditions. And we've been told that that condition will include us maintaining teacher numbers. Now, the rules around that, we still have to be informed of. So at the moment, we advised council last week when we set our budget that it would be, at this point in time, it would be unwise to accept any savings that would affect teacher numbers. And we haven't accepted any savings that affect teacher numbers because of the uncertainty around this. So we will await further information on what the rules are around this, and then we will plan any activity that we need to around making sure that we protect the funding that we expect to get in 2024-25. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Can we agree the report?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Item 5, the Revenue Budget Monitoring 2023-24, the detailed resource analysis, pages 41 to 110, and I'll pass on to Lorraine O'Hannigan, who's the Finance Manager.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Agenda item 5 then is the normal detailed analysis of the Council's monitoring statement that Jackie's just taken you through. And if I can take you to the first resource, which is on page 43, that shows the position in the greyed out box for community and enterprise resources as break-even. And as at period 10, we're showing an underspend of £181,000. Across the following pages then, pages 44 through to 52, I think, 51, sorry, we have the detailed narrative explanations for any variances, Any new variances for members' attention are underlined, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the members in relation to that report? Councillor Mars.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to refer to page 64 on the papers, where payments to other bodies, and I'm led to understand that payment to private contractor of 44,115,000 is referring to the contractor for the PPP contracts for secondary schools. That's, as I understand it, this year's payment in a term of a loan that I would like further detail on. So what is the term of the PPP contract? And given this is based on RPI and it will obviously vary the payment year to year, do we have a projected overall cost over the 30-year term for this payment to private contractors?
Sorry, Councillor Mars, could you clarify which page you were referring to?
Yes, it's page 64. So
That's community enterprise section, which I'm not sure.
oh, I'm
covered.
sorry. My apologies. I'll wait until you get to
No,
the
that's
education.
okay. I was getting myself mixed up there, so that's fine. We can clarify that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so any further questions on what we have been discussing?
Thank you. I was just going to respond to Councillor Mars' question, if that's okay. Councillor Mars, in terms of a projected overall cost, you're correct that the amount that we pay on an annual basis is dependent on inflation. So we won't have an accurate estimation of what we'll pay over the term of this contract. What we can provide is the term of that contract. My understanding is it's 30 years. I'm looking to Lorraine to just check that. That hasn't changed from when this was agreed, which was a number of years ago. What I would remind, though, everyone of is the fact that that payment is also bound by income that we get from the Scottish Government in terms of what we call level playing field support. So there is an income line that comes into the council, which I believe is around about £11 to £12 million that contributes towards that. It also achieved the delivery of all of our new secondary schools when they were built, and it also covers some of the costs that the council was already incurring for our old schools around hard facilities management. So it's not simply a payment to a contractor for nothing. It is covering the costs of the delivery of those schools and the facilities management that I referred to earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the community enterprise. I think we've covered that, unless there are further questions. Councillor Mars.
With your indulgence, Chair, because I realise we're talking at a slightly different part of the paper now, but just to respond to Jackie's comment on page 64 on the PPP payment, I wonder if that detail, the level of detail of money from the Scottish Government and what that money is for, could actually appear in the papers going forward, that it could be detailed as monies for PPP and the contractor that receives that, to make it easier to understand that payment. And also, and I realise that RPI is ever changing and has changed a lot since the beginning of the term of this loan, but I think it would be probably useful making a reasonable assumption to have further detail on the expected eventual payment of that loan period.
Thank you, Councillor Mars. In terms of including the separate line of income, it doesn't appear within our departmental lines. It is Scottish Government income that we get, along with a number of other lines of Scottish Government income, and that's why we don't show it separately. I'm happy to, as part of this meeting, continue to report that that is part of the income that we get, but I wouldn't suggest that we start to break down Scottish Government grant into each component part within this report. In terms of us estimating what RPI will be and what the overall cost of the contract is, whilst I can do a sum, it doesn't reflect an accurate estimate of what we will expect to pay. This is a contract that we have signed up to. It's been for a number of years. I can happily do sums and share it with you, but I would have to caution that that wouldn't reflect an accurate position on what we may have to pay going forward. There are variations that happen on an annual basis based on whether all facilities are available for use. There are conditions within the contract where we may pay less or pay more depending on the availability of classrooms, for example. So whilst a calculation can be done, I cannot say with any certainty that that will reflect an accurate position on how we spend over the coming years.
Thank you. The section on community enterprise, are we happy to agree that and move on? And Lorraine, could you do the next section as well, please?
Thank you. So education resources then starts on page 57, again showing the forecast position for the year of an overspend in the greyed out box and an overspend to the end of December on the bottom right hand side, and this has all been included as part of the Council's overall monitoring position for the probable outturn. In terms of the detailed variance analysis for education, they start on page 58 and run through to page 60. And again, any new variances are underlined for members' attention. And again, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions on that section? Well, I'm happy to, Lorraine, for you to guide us through the next section.
Oh, thank you. Finance and corporate resources then is the next resource. And again, on page 67, you can see the forecast position in the greyed out box, and the percentage of that to the end of December is shown in the bottom right hand corner, and we're showing an overspend of 179,000. The narrative explanations for any variances along the subjective lines and across the services is shown from pages 68 through to page 71. And again, new variance explanations that have come up this period for the first time are highlighted with an underline. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions regarding that section of the report? I'm happy for you to carry on to the next part.
Housing and technical resources then is on page 77. The forecast is a break-even and a break-even position at the end of period 10, which is the end of December. The variance explanations are shown on pages 78 to 82. And again, any new variances are underlined. I'm happy to take any questions on those. Thank you.
Sorry, excuse me. Any questions on that section of the report? Okay, Lorraine, if you just want to follow on then. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Councillor Lockhart, over to you.
Hello, sorry, me again. I'm just looking at the variance, which nearly always seems to be partially, if not mainly, caused by the recruitment problem. I'm just wondering if you get any update, any views. Are we seeing any improvements on recruitment, or are we still struggling? And I wonder if there's a figure to the under-recruitment, a percentage figure.
Councillor Lockhart, just to answer your first question, in terms of recruitment, through workforce monitoring reports to committee, there will be updates provided for each department on any particular issues around recruitment. We know that there are pockets of the business where there has been difficulty, and it's not just in South Lanarkshire, it's across the board in terms of being able to recruit and retain staff. So our colleagues in personnel are absolutely aware of that, and they will work with departments to make sure that we are recruiting when and how we can. In terms of your last question, I think you were asking if we have a percentage of recruitment, if I'm picking up your question correctly. If that's in relation to how we budget, we don't make any assumptions around levels of recruitment there. What we will do is set our budgets based on what we expect and hope to spend in a year. But we have seen, and you'll have seen that yourself through this forum, we have seen that for a period of time we have seen underspends in certain pockets of the services, and we will continue to monitor that along with our colleagues in personnel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Lorraine, if you want to carry on to the next part.
Thank you. So the next area that we look at is the housing revenue account, and this on page 89 of your papers is just a bit more detail in terms of the information Jackie gave you earlier. Again, I would underline any new variances, but there aren't any for this one this time. So the variance explanations are just there for members' information. Thank you.
Any questions on that section? Okay, if you want to move on to the last section, please.
Thank you. Social work resources then is on page 97, showing a break-even position as part of the probability turn in the greyed out box, and showing a break-even position at the end of period 10. Again, the variance explanations are provided for members' information, and again with any new variances underlined, and they take us through to the end of the pack. So I'm happy to take any questions on social work. Thank you.
Any questions on the social work part? So could we agree the report?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mars. So we move on to item number 6, urgent business. I'd like to thank you all for attending the meeting, and have a nice afternoon, unless there is anything else. The meeting is now closed. Thank you.